Constitutions are utterly worthless to restrain the tyranny of governments, unless it be understood that the people will, by force, compel the government to keep within the constitutional limits. Practically speaking, no government knows any limits to its power, except the endurance of the people. That the people are stronger than the government and will resist in extreme cases, our governments would be little or nothing else than organised systems of plunder and oppression. All, or nearly all, the advantage there is in fixing any constitutional limits to the power of a government is simply to give notice to the government of the point at which it will meet with resistance. If the people are then as good as their word, they may keep the government within the bounds they have set for it. Otherwise, it will disregard them, as is proved by the example of all our American governments, in which the constitutions have all become obsolete at the moment of their adoption, for nearly or quite all purposes except the appointment of officers, who at once become practically absolute, except so far as they are restrained by the fear of popular resistance.
I don't have all the answers. I may not have any of them. But I am convinced that if people are free, rather than constrained and kicked around as they are under government as we know it, they will find better, more genuine and workable answers than any that the government's bureaucrats, kept intellectuals, and running dogs can devise. Freedom is not a blueprint for society. It's a process by which people alter society for the better without using force to do so.
We make a mistake to plead and litigate with our masters using only the tools they have provided us. We cannot prevail within a frame of the same rules by which we are enslaved. By this pleading, we only feed the monster with our energy and money. We must take back personal responsibility for our independence and for our survival. One way is to exercise our natural right to ignore the state, to renounce it, and to work at building an independent life, accepting neither the state's benefits nor its costs to the extent we are able to avoid them.
The Constitution of No Authority by Lysander Spooner, in my opinion, is the most thorough, well-articulated, well-thought-out, and groundbreaking systematic dismantling of the concept of political authority and social contract theory which has ever been written, and in under 100 pages no less. If Spooner's work in general were more known about, I can guarantee you that more people would not be statists. Hence why, despite the numerous monumental achievements he achieved, such as writing the pamphlet which pretty much pioneered the 19th century U.S. abolitionist movement, and demonstrating definitively that private enterprise and counter-economics is more efficient and profitable as a means of associating and achieving political change with his American Letter Mail Company, which for the record was in operation from 1844 to 1851, and was delivering cross-country mail more efficiently than the U.S. Post Office currently does in 2019. He is never mentioned in the mainstream media. Or, more than likely because of all of his accomplishments and contributions to legal theory, he never gets mentioned.
The whole authority of the Constitution rests upon the consent of the people. If they did not consent, it was of no validity. Of course it had no validity, except as between those who actually consented. No one's consent could be presumed against him without his actual consent being given, any more than in the case of any other contract to pay money or render service. And to make it binding upon anyone, his signature, or other positive evidence of consent was as necessary as in the case of any other contract. If the instrument meant to say that any of the people of the United States would be bound by it, who did not consent, it was a usurpation and a lie. The most that can be inferred from the form, we the people, is that the instrument offered membership to all the people of the United States, leaving it for them to accept or refuse it at their pleasure.
Anarchists did not try to carry out genocide against the Armenians in Turkey. They did not deliberately starve millions of Ukrainians. They did not create a system of death camps to kill Jews, Gypsies, and Slavs in Europe. They did not firebomb scores of large German and Japanese cities and drop nuclear bombs on 2 of them. They did not carry out a great leap forward that killed scores of millions of Chinese. They did not attempt to kill everybody with any appreciable education in Cambodia. They did not launch one aggressive war after another. They did not implement trade sanctions that killed perhaps 500,000 Iraqi children. In debates between anarchists and statists, the burden of proof clearly should rest on those who place their trust in the state. Anarchy's mayhem is wholly conjectural. The state's mayhem is undeniably, factually horrendous.
Jesus, in some respects, was an anarchist, for he had no idea of civil government. That government seems to him purely and simply an abuse. A great social revolution in which rank will be overturned, in which all authority in this world will be humiliated, was his dream.
In truth, the belief in government is a religion made up of a set of dogmatic teachings, irrational doctrines which fly in the face of both evidence and logic, and which are methodically memorized and repeated by the faithful. Like other religions, the gospel of government describes a superhuman, supernatural entity above mere mortals, which issues commandments to the peasantry, for whom unquestioning obedience is a moral imperative. Disobeying to the commandments, breaking the law, is viewed as a sin, and the faithful delight in the punishment of the infidels and sinners, criminals, while at the same time taking great pride in their own loyalty and humble subservience to their God as law-abiding taxpayers. And while the mortals may humbly beg their Lord for favours and for permission to do certain things, it is considered blasphemous and outrageous for one of the lowly peasants to imagine himself to be fit to decide which of the government god's laws he should follow, and which it is okay for him to ignore. Their mantra is, you can work to try to change the law, but as long as it's the law, we all have to follow it.
Inasmuch as the Constitution was never signed, nor agreed to, by anybody as a contract, and therefore never bound anybody, and is now binding upon nobody, and is, moreover, such an one as no people can ever hereafter be expected to consent to, except as they may be forced to do so at the point of the bayonet, it is perhaps of no importance what its true legal meaning as a contract is. Nevertheless, the writer thinks it proper to say that, in his opinion, the Constitution is no such instrument as it has generally been assumed to be, but that by false interpretations and naked usurpations, the government has been made in practice a very widely and almost wholly different thing from what the Constitution itself purports to authorize. He has heretofore written much, and could write much more, to prove that such is the truth. But whether the Constitution really be one thing or another, this much is certain, that it has either authorized such a government as we have had, or has been powerless to prevent it. In either case, it is unfit to exist.
What is the difference between mafia and government? What literally happens is that one group of people issues a command, and their enforcers impose it upon the masses by punishing disobedience. This is what the mafia does, what street gangs do, what schoolyard bullies do, and what all governments do. The difference is that when government does it, it uses not only threats, but also indoctrination of both the enforcers and the general public, whereas the message of most thugs are usually direct and honest. Do what I say or I hurt you. The government message involves a great deal of psychology and mind control, which is essential to making the state mercenaries feel righteous about inflicting oppression on others. The controllers in government portray themselves as lawmakers who have the right to govern society, portray their commands as laws, and portray any who disobey as criminals. And, unlike mafia heavies, those who administer retribution against any who disobey the politicians are portrayed not merely as hired thugs, but as noble law enforcers who are righteously protecting society from all the uncivilized, contemptuous lawbreakers.
The word country refers to the territorial jurisdiction of a federal or national government. The word government refers to the political body that exercises authority over a certain jurisdiction. The word authority means the right to rule. Therefore, using the phrase a free country is oxymoronic. If a place is free, then it doesn't have a ruling class. And if it doesn't have a ruling class, then it's not a country.
Politicians are a species of actor. As a rule, they know nothing about how the world works or how to perform a valuable task in real, i.e., non-political life. They know only how to act in such a way as to get themselves elected to public office. Democracy is a political system in which such ignoramuses are elected by people who know all sorts of things about real life, and those elected are empowered to make rules in excruciating detail, or to establish the framework in which bureaucrats at their disposal make such rules about how people must live their lives. It is a system in which those who know worthwhile things are ruled by people who do not know worthwhile things. Given its nature, it works precisely as any sensible person would expect.
I'm not scared of the Maos and the Stalins and the Hitlers. I'm scared of the thousands of millions of people that hallucinate them to be authority and so do their bidding and pay for their empires and carry out their orders. I don't care if there's one loony with a stupid moustache. He's not a threat if the people do not believe in authority.
Are you a voluntarist? Voluntarism is the word that's been coined to describe the idea that voluntary dealings between people is the best option. It means there's consent between individuals, and that violently forcing other people to do things they don't want to do is wrong. As long as we're not hurting anyone, our personal choices are ours to make. We don't always agree with everything everyone does, but if we can respect people's freedom to make decisions for themselves, we can get along just fine. Not everyone is going to do this, but to be a voluntarist is to decide that we will be one of the people who do. It's a decision to be part of the solution in our own small way. This doesn't mean we have to accept wrongdoing from people who have yet to accept this idea, but it means people get to live their own lives, as long as they're not harming anyone else.
You are not Christians. You are not Jews. You are not Muslims. And you certainly aren't atheists. You all have the same God, and its name is government. You're all members of the most insane, destructive cult in history. If there ever was a devil, the state is it. And you worship it with all your heart and soul.
In the World War, we used propaganda to make the boys accept conscription. They were made to feel ashamed if they didn't join the army. So vicious was this war propaganda that even God was brought into it. With few exceptions, our clergymen joined in the clamor to kill the Germans. God is on our side. It is His will that the Germans be killed. And in Germany, the good pastors called upon the Germans to kill the Allies, to please the same God. That was a part of the general propaganda, built up to make people war-conscious and murder-conscious. Beautiful ideals were painted for our boys who were sent out to die. This was the war to end all wars. This was the war to make the world safe for democracy. No one mentioned to them, as they marched away, that their going and their dying would mean huge war profits. No one told these American soldiers that they might be shot down by bullets made by their own brothers here. No one told them that the ships on which they were going to cross might be torpedoed by submarines built with United States patents. They were just told it was to be a glorious adventure.
Contrary to what nearly everyone has been taught to believe, government is not necessary for civilization. It is not conducive to civilization. It is, in fact, the antithesis of civilization. It is not cooperation or working together or voluntary interaction. It is not peaceful coexistence. It is coercion, it is force, it is violence. It is animalistic aggression, cloaked by pseudo-religious, cult-like rituals, which are designed to make it appear legitimate and righteous. It is brute thuggery, disguised as consent and organization. It is the enslavement of mankind, the subjugation of free will, and the destruction of morality, masquerading as civilization and society. The problem is not just that authority can be used for evil. The problem is that, at its most basic essence, it is evil. In everything it does, it defeats the free will of human beings controlling them through coercion and fear. It supersedes and destroys moral consciences, replacing them with unthinking, blind obedience. It cannot be used for good, any more than a bomb can be used to heal a body. It is always aggression, always the enemy of peace, always the enemy of justice. The moment it ceases to be an attacker, it ceases to fit the definition of government. It is, by its very nature, a murderer and a thief, the enemy of mankind, a poison to humanity. As dominator and controller, ruler and oppressor, it can be nothing else.
In a combat setting, nearly everything that every government military does constitutes aggressive terrorism, and almost every order a soldier receives is an immoral order, whether it is to trespass on someone else's property, blow up a bridge, block a road, disarm civilians, detain and interrogate people without justification, or kill complete strangers just on the say-so of a supposed authority. In fact, even when the rules of engagement are only to fire if fired upon, that is still often unjustified. When one is the aggressor, whether individually or acting on behalf of authority, the target of that aggression has the right to use whatever force is necessary to stop the aggressor. In other words, in a lot of situations, shooting at soldiers, including American soldiers, is inherently justified. Killing someone for defending himself against aggressors is murder, even when the aggressors are U.S. soldiers. And almost every soldier routinely commits immoral acts of aggression, believing that commands from authority make it okay for him to do so. If any soldier actually took seriously the idea that he had the duty to disobey an immoral order, the first thing he would do would be to quit the military.
Probably the chief claim that governments make to legitimacy is that they act as the people's protectors. Yet if one examines how governments use their police and soldiers, one finds that these enforcers, purportedly protectors, are for the most part deployed not to protect people's natural rights, but to violate them. Consider how rarely governments' wars have anything to do with warding off genuine threats, and how, in almost every instance, they have everything to do with promoting the foreign interests of politically connected banks and exporters. Consider, too, how much police enforcement goes toward enforcing laws against actions that are not really criminal, actions that harm no one except possibly the actor himself, and in many cases are actually beneficial. Drug laws of all sorts, laws against vices, laws against smuggling, laws against practicing trades without a license. Most traffic laws, all sorts of local ordinances about how people use or maintain their houses and other property, laws against the free migration of peaceful people across national borders, laws requiring all sorts of reports of personal, economic, and financial activities, laws seeking payment and collection of taxes, practically all regulations of every kind. The list is endless. The governments aim not at protecting people and upholding their natural rights, but at hurting them, oppressing them, bullying them, plundering them, and generally treating them as if they had no more rights than livestock. If this be protection, I beg of the rulers, please cease your protection. I cannot survive much more of it.
While a belief in authority can lead people to inflict harm on others, that same belief often cannot limit the extent to which the agents of authority hurt other people. For example, many individuals who would never oppress an innocent person on their own become police officers, thereby acquiring the legal power to commit a certain degree of oppression. Yet, on many occasions, they end up going well beyond the legal oppression they are authorized to commit and become sadistic, power-happy monsters. The same is true, perhaps even more so, of soldiers. Perhaps the reason so many combat veterans end up being deeply emotionally traumatized is not so much a result of thinking about what they have witnessed as it is a result of thinking about what they themselves have done. The high rate of suicide among combat veterans supports this thesis. It makes little sense for someone to wish for his own death simply because he has seen something horrible. It makes a lot more sense for someone to wish for his own death because he himself has done something horrible and has in fact become something horrible.
Most people fear a world without government, never stopping to realize that their worst fears are already realized in the present system. They think we need government to protect us because people are greedy, destructive, and predatory. And so they allow greedy, destructive, predatory people to govern their lives. The result is the mess we see around us. As Jefferson said, if man can't be trusted to govern himself, how can he be trusted to govern others?
People do not have the power to grant authority over anything but what they personally have authority over, i.e. their own property. Furthermore, in so doing, they relinquish that ownership. If I have the exclusive right to decide what's done with my car, but I then grant that authority to you, that's called transfer of ownership. So even if you had a right to do the things that government does, which you don't, you'd be giving it away the moment you elected them, because once they're elected, you have no more control. They don't have to check back with you to do anything, so they are not being delegated power over the property as your agent. They are becoming the sole owner of it. And that property is you and everything within the confines of your nation's territorial area. In addition to all this, you don't even have consensus, only majority rule in support of this system.
If ye love wealth better than liberty, the tranquility of servitude better than the animating contest of freedom, go home from us in peace. We ask not your counsels or arms. Crouch down and lick the hands which feed you. May your chains set lightly upon you, and may posterity forget that ye were our countrymen.
We would do well to remember that voting is often a way not of consenting to something, but only of expressing a preference. If the state gives a group of condemned prisoners the choice of being executed by firing squad or by lethal injection, and all of them vote for firing squad, we cannot conclude from this that the prisoners thereby consent to being executed by firing squad. They do, of course, choose this option, they approve of it, but only in the sense that they prefer it to the other option. They consent to neither option, despising both. Voting for a candidate in a democratic election sometimes has a depressingly similar structure. The state offers you a choice among candidates, or perhaps it is the people who make the offer, and you choose one, hoping to make the best of a bad situation. You thereby express a preference, approve of that candidate over the others, but consent to the authority of no one.
Why do so many people have so much trouble concentrating on one thing? If it is wrong, as I maintain, for people, even people who style themselves the government, to initiate or threaten to initiate violent action against peaceful people simply because they have crossed a so-called national border without official approval, then such wrongful action should stop, and decent people should oppose its continuation. It is a red herring to raise questions about crimes the migrants might commit, welfare benefits they might collect, politicians, parties, and causes they might ultimately support at the polls, and cultural changes they might bring about. Apart from the great uncertainty that surrounds these possible future events, they are separate issues that relate to all residents of the country, not only to those who came into the country from elsewhere. The existence of possible future problems associated with crime, welfare, voting, and cultural change is not a valid excuse for continuation of the violence initiated or threatened by the government against peaceful immigrants. The existence of possible wrongs of type B, C, D, and E is not an excuse for the continuation of type A wrong in the here and now.
My purpose on this earth is not to finance destruction and murder, but to learn the practice of gratitude and reverence for all life. I seek a life of love and reason. I have no loyalty to the Constitution of the United States. My loyalty to humanity supersedes any loyalty to a state or any other constituted authority founded upon and maintained by violence and coercion. How can a rational man be loyal to a frozen in-time document which have been drawn in secrecy for their own self-interest by a few rich and powerful men long since dead? What can be a man's loyalty to a document which his so-called representatives and leaders have for generations abused, distorted, and bent to their own evil purposes? Who did I appoint to commit murder in my name because of loyalty to the politically shrewd and the cunning words of self-proclaimed representatives of people who never knew them? I disown all of this. Acquiescence to this charade makes us sheep, corralled behind a fence of words, herded by rapacious lawmakers, marched to slaughter under the delusion that we voted for. All other persons and groups in society, except for acknowledged and sporadic criminals such as thieves and bank robbers, obtain their income voluntarily, either by selling goods or services to the consuming public or by voluntary gift, e.g., membership in a club or association, bequest, or inheritance. Only the state obtains its revenue by coercion, by threatening dire penalties should the income not be forthcoming. That coercion is known as taxation, although in less regularized epochs, it was often known as tribute. Taxation is theft purely and simply, even though it is theft on a grand and colossal scale, which no acknowledged criminals could hope to match.
Socialism, like the ancient ideas from which it springs, confuses the distinction between government and society. As a result of this, every time we object to a thing being done by government, The socialists conclude that we object to its being done at all. We disapprove of state education. Then the socialists say that we are opposed to any education. We object to a state religion. Then the socialists say that we want no religion at all. We object to a state-enforced equality. Then they say that we are against equality, and so on and so on. It is as if the socialists were to accuse us of not wanting persons to eat because we do not want the state to raise grain.
The educated anarchist seeks to uplift mankind to a higher state of consciousness, both morally and intellectually. The goal isn't to abolish government and set the dumbed-down masses loose into a world they don't understand, as was done with African American slaves in the Americas, but rather to encourage the enlightenment of the population, such that they understand the manipulation they've fallen victim to, and have a clear sense of the path going forward. When that reaches a tipping point, the responsibilities of true freedom will be embraced as a matter of course, and external authority will not only be seen as unnecessary, but will be clearly perceived as the dreadful injustice it has always been.
Anarchists know that a long period of education must precede any great fundamental change in society. Hence they do not believe in vote-begging, nor political campaigns, but rather in the development of self-thinking individuals.
If the natural tendencies of mankind are so bad that it is not safe to permit people to be free, how is it that the tendencies of these organizers are always good? Do not the legislators and their appointed agents also belong to the human race? Or do they believe that they themselves are made of a finer clay than the rest of mankind?
Anarchists are pioneers. It cannot be expected that there will be smooth roads on our course. Our tombstones will read, "You have died of dysentery." We need freedom by way of a cultural rise in consciousness, meaning increased awareness and understanding, which in our society simply means overcoming the malicious psychological manipulation we have been immersed in since birth.
Have aliens visited this planet? Absolutely. Person B, of course not. How ridiculous. How the hell could anyone possibly know this? Even if they were abducted, they don't know who did it. Could have been the government using holographic disguises. We need to differentiate between true knowledge and mere belief based upon perceived probability. I don't know that Abraham Lincoln existed, nor that stars are suns, though I believe these things quite likely. I do know that taxation is theft, however.
The whole aim of practical politics is to keep the populace alarmed, and hence clamorous, to be led to safety, by menacing it with an endless series of hobgoblins.
I recently had a good discussion about anarchy, and the person I was discussing it with asked about what would be done with a country's nuclear arsenal. I postulated that the military would become privatized into private security companies, but their concern was with the organization required to respond effectively to an outside threat of nuclear attack. I told them that I personally do not have all the answers, but that necessity is always the mother of invention. How have you handled this question or similar?
At this point, I don't indulge what would be done about XYZ questions from statists under any circumstances. Just one of the pearls of experience. The implication is that it's reasonable to hold back their assent to the morally superior position until all their personal concerns are satisfied. It becomes a red herring rabbit hole because it feeds their dysfunctional self-focus rather than resolving it. Give an addict a hand, and he'll take the arm with it. Between anarchists, this armchair discussion is a suitable pastime, but until you've accepted that slavery is entirely unacceptable, regardless of how that acknowledgement plays out in practice, we've got bigger fish to fry, and you don't get to enjoy the luxury of tangentials.
Have you ever noticed how statists are constantly reforming their own handiwork? Education reform, healthcare reform, welfare reform, tax reform. The very fact that they're always busy reforming is an implicit admission that they didn't get it right the first 50 times.
If the government directed people to do something that their reason opposed, they were to defy the government. If it told them to do what their reason would have told them to do anyway, they did not need a government.
To say that majorities, as such, have a right to rule minorities is equivalent to saying that minorities have, and ought to have, no rights except such as majorities please to allow them.
As much as I agree that we should appreciate what's worthy of appreciation, I find the sentiment, life is pretty good right now, exceedingly grotesque, coming from a first world person sitting in a feathered nest who is contributing to the destruction of lives, both here and abroad, via a system that he seems to believe he has a right to ponder about casually. You don't get to choose yay or nay on the enslavement of others like it's vanilla or chocolate ice cream. Not if you want to make any claim to being a good person. Your failure to recognise what the hell is going on is having a real effect on real people. So stop worrying about what you think is comfortable and what you speculate will be better or worse, and start getting your head in the game and advocating what is right.
I'm 71 years old, and I've been watching the TV news all my life, and I believed everything they said. Why would they lie? I would tell myself. Then JFK was assassinated in a carefully staged CIA coup, and they covered it up with a lie. Then the Vietnam War started on an event that never happened. Then I personally saw 5 UFOs, and the government said that they don't exist. Then Martin Luther King was murdered by a government hitman who was never found. Then 9/11 happened, and the Iraq and Afghanistan wars began after George Bush told us that there were weapons of mass destruction, and Saddam had ties with Al-Qaeda. Then Hillary Clinton and James Comey lied through their teeth in front of Congress on national television. Then we bailed out the corporate bankers with $85 billion of our own tax dollars. Then $21 trillion more of our own tax money disappeared, and no one even knows where it went. Tons of own money just walked out the door, and nobody even noticed. Then I finally asked myself, should I really be listening to the government?
A grand total of 0 statists reached their belief systems by starting from scratch and applying logic and principles to evidence. Instead, every statist was indoctrinated into a collection of ridiculous, self-contradictory political mythology, which they then zealously repeat and defend as if they had thought it up themselves.
The state is the great fiction through which everybody endeavors to live at the expense of everyone else.
Statism is a position that asserts the prudence of founding society upon a lie. In what other circumstance would this be advisable? Shall we build boats based upon false concepts of flotation? Shall we install fuel indicators in vehicles that always display full, regardless of how much gas is in the tank? This is the bewildered confusion that results from fear. And every statist argument is positively dripping with fear. Intuition alone should make clear to any onlooker that the anarchist argument exudes courage, power, love, and responsibility, while the statists' concerns project their cowardice, willful ignorance, and lack of respect for all, including self.
It seems clear that legalized marijuana is the wave of the future in the USA. Many states have already legalized medical or recreational marijuana, and more seem sure to follow. So after many decades, this busybody jihad, deeply entrenched because it served so well the interests of cops, prosecutors, legislators, and the prison industrial complex, is moving toward its end. However, while these events are unfolding, hundreds of thousands of persons remain in prison or on probation, even in states that have completely legalized weed. It was grossly unjust for them to have been imprisoned in the first place. It is even more unjust for them to be kept there serving sentences for actions that are now completely legal. How can anyone possibly justify this senseless continuation of persecution?
The claim that anarchism is utopian is bizarre, but nevertheless common. Much anarchist literature deals with private law enforcement and defense. These would not be needed in a utopia. In fact, the fallibility of humans is one of the basic tenets of anarchism. The belief that a small group of people can be trusted to run defense and law enforcement efficiently as a monopoly without putting their own needs above those of the people, without ever being corrupt, and without overstepping their mandate. Now that is utopia. To believe that the losers in an election will happily support the policies of the winners, and that the policies aren't being forced upon those people. Now that is utopian. To believe that the funding of all this via taxation is a foundation of peace rather than an act of war. Now that is utopian. Anarchists oppose all those things precisely because they are not utopian dreamers. Anyone who questions anarchism because of human nature should take a closer look at how human nature impacts their own proposal. One involves giving fallible humans power, one does not.